Where's my start streaming button gone? Go live. There it is.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mental Health Staff Hour, the final part of the four-part series. Thank you very much for all your support over the last, I think it's 6 weeks we've done these within. So I really appreciate you supporting and sharing these episodes. So today is all about grief, loss, and bereavement, and we are joined by two fantastic guests. So if you've never joined us before, my name is Sam Tyrer. I'm the Prevention and Engagement Lead at Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust. I'm also the founder of an educational service called Change Talks, which aim is to prevent ill health, and I'm also the co-host of this show. Dave.
And I'm Dave, aka Mindset by Dave. I don't have as many fancy titles as Sam. My official job title is some dude on the internet that tries to help you with your mental health. And that's what I'm here for. I am the host of this channel, co-host of this episode, and the guy who's going to be looking after the people in the comments section.
Perfect. So if anyone does have any questions or comments that you want answering, or you just want to say anything about the episode, put them into the chat box and Dave will monitor that as we go along. We'll pick up the questions 10 minutes before the end. And if you do want to ask any questions following this webinar, then please do email me on sam.tyrer, so that's Tyrer at lscft.nhs.uk. And I'll repeat that again at the end. So welcome to our guests. Suzie, could you please introduce yourself?
Of course. Good morning. My name's Suzie, and I have the pleasure of working in the same team as Sam, and at Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Trust. But I lead the Lancashire Recovery College, which is a college that looks at health and wellbeing courses from a lived experience perspective and a community perspective. So, yeah, here today to talk about what we're offering in regards to loss, grief, and bereavement too.
Perfect. And Victoria.
Hi, I'm Victoria Higham. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work for Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Trust as well. So I work predominantly into our older people service. I work in an older adult crisis team based in East Lancashire, but I also do roles within an adult community mental health team and one of our initial assessment teams as well. And I've done a little bit of work with Suzie, so that's how I got involved in this.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So to start with, we'll go straight into it. Could you explain to the viewers what actually is loss of a person, role, or thing? What is it?
So as you've kind of suggested there, a lot of people hear the word loss and they think it's loss of a person. And that is absolutely the case. It can be that you've lost a significant other, or at work we might have lost a colleague, and it might be that that person has sadly passed away, or it might be that the person has moved on, particularly when we think about our colleagues, getting new roles and things like that, and that can be experienced as a loss. But loss is also a bit more than that, and you come across this quite a lot working in older people's services, particularly when people have retired. Loss can mean a loss of part of your identity, part of your role. So if you've always worked and it's been a really big part of your identity, and I know this is the case for me, my work is my passion, it's a really big part of my identity. But when that finishes, it can be experienced as a loss. But loss can also be loss of a pet, loss of an animal, anything where you have a connection to that person or thing or role, and it's an important part of your identity. When that's gone, it can be experienced as a loss. So I think it's really important that we kind of think of loss in a bit more of a fluid way, rather than it just being attached to just losing a person. And as I kind of mentioned there about losing a colleague, we often exist in teams, in kind of these little social kind of networks. And when somebody moves on, it shifts the whole dynamic within that team. And for some, that can be experienced as quite a significant loss because, our colleagues aren't just colleagues, they're our friends as well. And they kind of move on and it kind of shifts things. And I know, obviously, when we've kind of talked about this staff hour, Sam, we've talked about how the impact of COVID and obviously loss has been much more kind of prevalent. And loss can be when colleagues have had we've had colleagues that have gone off on long-term sickness, and that's massively affected the dynamics within a team. If you lose a team member because they've sadly died, or you lose a team member because they've gone on long-term sick, or they've moved on, it shifts that whole dynamic within your team. And there's a process that needs to take place, a process of adjustment. But I think often we rumble on in services, and we do lose people, and we don't always kind of take a moment to take stock, and COVID's presented us the opportunity to kind of take stock and think about the impact that these losses have kind of had on us. So there is that process, and it's not always that you were really, really close to that person, but what you've got going on. And in a little while, I'll kind of talk about kind of different models of loss and grief and how that kind of interplays, really. So yeah, it's much more than just a person passing away. It's significant in how it kind of plays out, really, and it's the process that happens after that we can perhaps spend a bit more time thinking about today.
Yeah, I think what I'd sort of like to reflect on is that, as you mentioned, over the last 12 months, a lot of staff unfortunately have lost colleagues or family members to COVID. Could you sort of touch on how they can sort of cope with the grief that comes with that, and also how we as staff members can support our colleagues that are experiencing this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the Recovery College, we've done myself and another colleague have done some kind of podcasts, and we've talked about different kind of models of grief, because the loss is what happens, and the grief is the process that kind of follows. The mourning is what happens following the loss, and that process of adjusting. So there's a number of kind of different kind of traditional models that we've got. So I suppose the main one that people often know about is the Kubler-Ross model, which is the 5 stages of grief. And it's often used in kind of popular culture, so people kind of know about it. So there's 5 stages where you go through a process of denial. So that's kind of avoidance and a period of confusion and shock and fear at the initial knowing about the loss. And then comes anger, where you might experience kind of frustration or that irritation and kind of anxiety. And then is the depression that follows that, where people can become quite overwhelmed, and they can become quite hostile. And then there's the bargaining stage, which is the kind of struggling to find meaning. You might start reaching out to people and kind of telling your story. And then the final stage in that model is kind of acceptance. It's acceptance of the loss and kind of integrating the loss, and then starting to put new plans in place and kind of moving on. And at different kind of stages, people will need different things. So in those kind of early stages, what people need is that information and communication. In those kind of middle stages, where people are feeling depressed, it might be more emotional support that people need. And then in the latter stages, it's more that kind of guidance and direction to kind of think about. The other model that we've got alongside that is Worden's tasks of mourning. So that's thinking about what are the tasks or the things that we need to do in order to kind of process the loss and kind of move on from the loss. And there's an acronym that's used. It's TIR. So it's facing, firstly, the reality of the loss. So that's very similar in Kubler-Ross's model, in that it's that kind of just acknowledging the loss to begin with. And then there's a process of experiencing the pain and working through that pain and loss. And then the adjustment, and then the reinvestment in the new reality. For me, one of the difficulties with these models is because they're kind of stages, or there's kind of set processes that are laid out, there's an expectation there of I should be at certain places at certain times, and it kind of loses some of the fluidity, which is the reality of grief, really, and the kind of the grieving journey. So when we did the podcast, what we talked about was a different model, which is called the Whirlpool of Grief model. It's a visual model, and I know we've talked about that, we can share that model with people and you can kind of see it, but it's freely available. You can use different searches and find that, and just search the kind of Whirlpool of Grief. And for me, this is a much more fluid model, and it allows that kind of more individual journey. And when we think about COVID, for me, it feels a really, really relevant model. So the parts of that model are that you've got a river of life, and everybody navigates a different river. So some people's rivers are much more turbulent than others. And when we think about COVID, everybody's river is much more turbulent because of all this kind of weirdness and strangeness that's been going on. And you navigate that river in your own individual boat. So some people's boats are very big, fancy yachts. They've got a cheering squad of people on the bank of their river. And we think about COVID, you know, you people on your bank of your river might not have been there as much. Your boat might have got a little bit smaller. Some people are navigating that river clutching to a piece of wood because of their life experiences and their life circumstances. So you think about our teams that we work in, everybody's going to have a different river. Everybody's going to have a different boat. So when we think about losing a colleague, it's going to affect us all differently, and that's okay. And it's just about us kind of understanding that. We then hit the waterfall of bereavement, and that is where you kind of plunged over the waterfall. And what I really like about this model is that it kind of physically represents how it feels to lose someone, that you plunged, and that horrible sinking feeling, that physical reaction to that loss. And for me, that's really captured in this model. The idea of going over a waterfall, it physically affects your body, as does the loss. So that's where you kind of go through that shock and that numbness and that denial. Some of those kind of early things that are captured in those other models, so that kind of denial and that anger, where what you need is to be able to talk and to communicate at those stages. And then the next part of the whirlpool of grief is the whirlpool where you're swirling around. It's a jumble of different emotions, different experiences, and some parts of the whirlpool might be quite smooth, where other parts of the whirlpool have big rocks in there, and you're thrown up against the rocks and you just feel in that turmoil. And that's what I really love about that kind of whirlpool, how it's kind of really demonstrates that disorganization, that being thrown into the chaos. And that's what we feel, you know, when we lose someone or something or a part of us. It's chaotic, it's horrible. You don't want to feel that. But a big part of it is feeling. And the aim is to get out of that whirlpool. Is to get out of your whirlpool and get back on your river of life. But what I love most about this model is that whirlpool becomes part of your river. It doesn't just go, it doesn't just disappear. It shapes how your river will look going forward. And if you've had multiple waterfalls and multiple whirlpools, your river's going to look very, very different to somebody who has perhaps only had one. Or it might look different to somebody who started off in a big fancy yacht, and by the end of it, you are just on that battered piece of wood that you're kind of clinging on to. And that's what I like about it, because as a society, we do set ourselves expectations about, I should be feeling like this, or I should be feeling like that. For me, this model's really normalising and really captures that individual journey that people go on. And I think that's even more so when we think about staff losses. You know, you might look at your colleagues and think, well, it doesn't seem to have bothered them, or, you know, why is this person affected? Why is this person affected me so much? You know, I wasn't even close to them. But it's all those kind of different feelings. It makes you think about your own mortality. And if your river was already quite turbulent and your boat was already feeling quite fragile, then that's why it's perhaps affecting you a little bit more than it is your colleagues. And I think if we can kind of just acknowledge that everybody's river's different, everybody's boat's different, then it pulls down some of those expectations and allows us to just feel what we need to feel and kind of normalise with our colleagues what they're going through and why that's kind of different. It helps people to kind of understand why the loss and the journey is kind of affecting them differently.
I really like these models. Just reflecting on COVID, you mentioned, I think it was a Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief, which I thought explained it really well in sort of the different stages in the process with that. Because of COVID, do you think that some of the time that someone spends in these stages has been prolonged? So obviously there have been people that have lost family members or friends where they've not been able to see them. So, for example, do you think that the stage where you have anger and resentment, do you think that stage has then been prolonged for those individuals because of the current situation?
Definitely, and especially when you think about the context in which you've lost people. So sometimes if for example, if somebody's got a long-term illness, we might start to anticipate the loss, and we might start to go through some of these stages even before we've lost somebody. And we often see that really sadly when we're working with people with dementia, or we often have people with long-term conditions that have gone through kind of palliative care journeys. You might start to go through some of those processes beforehand, but if somebody's not been able to go along the journey with somebody because they've not been able to go into hospitals and support them through treatment, then that's kind of a rupture. It's kind of a disruption to that natural process that's starting to happen. And also, I think I'm not going to get into kind of political things, but there are things that have gone on in the media about the way that COVID's been handled and things like that. And actually, you think about people's natural frustration and kind of depression that might come as part of that loss. That's even more exacerbated, and it might keep those kind of feelings going. That kind of sense of injustice of not being able to be there. The journey of COVID, you think about the rituals and the processes that we naturally go through when we lose somebody as a society. So there's that kind of period of time before the funeral where everybody kind of comes together and they share their stories about the loved one. And often people are in that numbness stage because it allows you to get through the practicalities of being able to do that. And if you've not got somebody to kind of share that with, or you've been restricted, and then you might have had expectations about what you wanted for the funeral as well. That's a really important kind of ritual, and it's a really important part of the grieving. It helps you kind of work through some of these difficult emotions. We've not been able to give people the funerals that they might have wanted. People haven't been able to kind of come together and share their stories and celebrate the life of that person. And it might have been very unprepared. So when, the loss has come quite quickly, that's even more kind of shocking in some ways. So COVID's massively impacted these different stages and these different tasks that we kind of need to go through. When we lose someone, that's all massively a massive part of that kind of grieving process. That social connection, that kind of bringing people together and talking through how you feel, that is part of grieving. It's part of those tasks of mourning, accepting the reality and working through the pain. For some people, they might be working through that pain on their own. And they wouldn't have been doing that pre-COVID. They'd have been able to reach out to people and talk. And not everybody has access to technology to be able to connect with people. So definitely for the people that we work with at our older adult group who don't necessarily have the same technologies, that journey of doing that on your own, and it will take longer because it's just that isolation and not being able to kind of work through it in our normal ways, if you will.
And how can we support colleagues, friends, family members that are experiencing grief currently, there may be staff members that come in that are actually going through it on their own, that we could potentially support when they are coming into work or outside of work as well. What can we do as individuals to help support people get through it?
I think doing things like this, Sam, is a big part of that, because it's normalising that everybody will have experienced this. This is a massive thing that we all share. We know we've all lost somebody at some point, or will lose somebody at some point. It's part of being human. And I think the first thing to do, and what for me the similarities in across all these models, is there is a big stage of just feeling that you just need to kind of sit with. So if we can offer a space to staff where they can share how they're feeling and just kind of sit with it, because what we often want to do is push through to the next stages. We don't want to stay in that whirlpool and feel all those horrible feelings. It's human to want to get out of that whirlpool, but that's a really important part of it, to feel and experience the pain and not just push it away and not just try and deny it or avoid it, just feel it. And if we can offer a space to staff where we can say, what you're feeling is normal and what you're going through is completely understandable part of being human, it kind of sets that environment where we can share those spaces. So as a team, some of the things that we've done is just offered staff, as the psychologist within a team, we've offered, when we lose service users, which is inevitable but incredibly sad, when we've lost colleagues, we've actually just kind of come together as a team, whether it's having a little bit moment in the team meeting, or we've set up separate meetings where we've said to people, come along and just sit, just feel, just kind of talk about how you're feeling. And I think that's a big part of what managers can do. They can facilitate that time where it's not about what we should have done differently or what we could have done to prevent it or what we need to do to kind of protect. It's not about all those process things and how we can kind of prevent this happening again. It's just about staff having the space to share how they feel, to reconnect people back together. We sadly lost a colleague in our team. It wasn't COVID related, but it was during COVID, and we weren't able to kind of go to the funeral in the same way. We stood outside and we all had to socially distance. But we have a picture of him in our office, and we have a little kind of memory book where people shared their kind of stories. And that was a really important part of everybody kind of dealing with the loss, because it came very suddenly, it was very quick, and it kind of shocked us all. So we all kind of really pulled together and did those things. We sat and we named our feelings, we shared them. And we all came in one day wearing Doc Martens, because I loved his Doc Martens. So we kind of remembered him and had that little kind of ode to him. But I think that's what is a big thing that people can do for their colleagues, and resist that kind of judgment and that society expectations. And when we use models like Whirlpool of Grief and we do things like this, we're breaking down some of those expectations of, I should be here, I shouldn't be feeling like this, and that then kind of opens up to the just being a bit more compassionate and a bit kinder to people. For me, that's a really big part of what I do, is encouraging people to be a little bit kinder to themselves, to kinder to each other, and kinder to their colleagues as well. So I think that's the kind of foundation of that support.
Can I ask as well, how would you advise to sort of approach the conversation? Because I think sometimes people avoid saying anything because they don't want to cause any upset. So how would you advise us to approach a conversation when somebody has lost somebody? Because I think personally, if I've lost someone, I would rather someone ask me rather than avoid it completely.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I when I'm at work, I have an open door. I always say to people, come in, come talk to me whenever you want. And I check in with people. I check, are you okay? How are you doing? How's things? And I saw a program recently. It was about suicide in young people. And there was this idea of, are you okay? are you really okay? And kind of doing that. And that's something I've kind of taken on board with my colleagues. So I'll say to people, are you all right? You know, you don't seem yourself. And that opens it up. That creates that forum. And then when they say, yeah, I'm fine, I've said, are you really all right though? And asking that question again. And I'll often just say, why don't we have lunch today? Or why don't we go and kind of just have a little walk outside? And I think if we create that forum for people to kind of open up, people know that they can come to me now because I've been in my team for a number of years. But if you're starting in a new team or you're a manager and you're kind of thinking about different ways of working, I think that's how you can do that. Just check in, connect with people, human, not about work, not about what cases you've picked up, what visits you're doing, just checking in with people. I think that's a big thing that we can do for one another. To start that off. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in that formal space that we've created when we've needed it. It can just be that passing on the corridor and things like that. And that's really important, I think, if people to do that on Teams, in meetings, in and things like that, because some people might not be coming into the office. That's another kind of barrier that we've got to kind of go through. So as managers, making sure you've still got that kind of face-to-face check-in when it's needed, or that you're still having those conversations, whether it's in supervision, whether it's end of team meetings, you know, how's everybody feeling today at the end of the morning meetings? Or
it's one of the positives, really, isn't it, of COVID, is that I think it's been highlighted to all of us that we just need to spend a little more time checking in with each other. Because I think, you know, when we talk about how do we approach the subject with our colleagues and our friends, people are often worried about what the feedback's going to be. You know, what do I do if I ask and it triggers someone and they become really upset? Well, we naturally want to help one another and support one another. And it's fine if someone, you know, does become very upset, but you've asked the question, you're there, and that when you've experienced grief, it's very powerful to have a safe space to be able to just say to someone, do you know what, I feel awful and I don't know how I'm even here today, and that's fine. But I think that's where some of the fear about asking the question comes from. It's like, well, if that happens, what do I do next? And just be human, right? Okay, then, like you said, Victoria, let's go and have a cuppa, find a quiet space, and you know, just take this time.
I think that fear of upsetting your colleagues and fear of doing what's right or what should be done is a real powerful motivator. And I think if we can just go back to basics, go back to just connecting with people and checking in with people, it removes some of that. And as you said, Sam, you know, often when you've lost somebody, you want to talk about them, you want to share that, and that's part of that grieving. It's an important part of it to be able to talk about the loss, because some losses can be quite traumatic. And actually, if we think about the way our brain kind of processes things, talking is a way of processing those things. And if we don't talk about it, you know, we can process it, but it's not always in a healthy way. So kind of saying to people, it's all right to talk about it, and it'll be helpful to kind of talk about it, but equally being respectful that some people don't want to as well. And I think that kind of, for me, that double checking, that, are you okay? Yeah, I'm all right. Are you really okay? It gives people then that, I'm not just asking you because I have to, I'm asking you because I'm genuinely interested in what you're experiencing and what you're going through.
I found that giving people options, like, you know, so basically if you say to someone, you know, I know that you've just gone through this loss, I'm here for you if you want to talk about it, but at the same time, if you want me to just share silly cat memes with you and distract you, which way do you want me to play this? And just because ultimately, like Sam's just said then, you know, he really wants to talk about it, but there are a lot of people that don't. And then we've got no idea as well how many times the person's had that conversation, because we're always told check in with people because just in case no one else is. And then you get this rare occasion when everyone's checking in with them, and they've got exhaustion from having to express this over and over again. So I've found that, like, obviously, if you just say to the person, look, I'm here for you in whatever capacity you need me to be. If that means we talk about it, then cool, let's sit down, have a cup of tea and talk about it. But as I say, if you want to just talk about what's going on in the football or what's happening in the Marvel universe or cat memes, it's like that's what, I'm here for you however you need me, rather than us projecting what we think the person needs.
People need.
Like, have a bit of a dialogue, find out what they need.
Yeah, definitely, Dave. Yeah, I'd echo that. It's that choice, isn't it? We can create the spaces for people to talk if they want to, but equally, somebody might be kind of talked out, and actually what they need is that distraction and a little bit of humour.
Through cat memes.
Through cat memes
or baby shark memes.
You know what Dave's been looking at recently.
Whatever works for you, Dave.
All the animals available.
The last question, Victoria, is just going back to what I sort of mentioned before about the stages. Anger at the moment will be a big one over the last 12 months because people haven't been able to see relatives, unfortunately, when many of them have passed away.
Yeah.
They may feel stuck in that stage, and they're constantly just feeling anger towards perhaps individual members of staff, against the NHS, the government, whatever. How can they cope with that anger? Even if they have them social networks in place where they can talk to people, some people are still stuck feeling that rage. What advice can you give to those individuals?
I think, as you said, anger is a normal human emotion. It's what we do with the anger. And I think sometimes people need an outlet for the anger, because otherwise it kind of consumes you, and you can kind of internalize it on yourself, or it just kind of eats you up inside, and it can just lead to kind of swirling around and kind of ruminating over things. So having an outlet, I mean, for me, I'd always go back to the basics. So making sure that you're looking after yourself is probably one of the best ways that you can manage difficult emotions. So making sure that you're kind of eating well, drinking plenty. I think for me, outdoors is really important, and having kind of some kind of physical exercise within your own kind of limits. For me, exercise is really, really kind of good for anger, because anger produces a lot of adrenaline, and you want to kind of get it out of your system. So I think kind of working through it in that way. We had a colleague the other day that kind of came to me, and I was like, maybe you just need to go for a really hard walk outside and just kind of burn off some of that energy that you've got with that anger. But for me, it's normal to feel anger. I think we can sometimes kind of punish ourselves for feeling anger, because there's lots of kind of negative connotations with anger because of what some people do when they are angry. And for me, it's really important to kind of say it's absolutely understandable that you feel angry, but kind of work through it and kind of work it out of your system. And then a big part of the recovery from loss, or the kind of getting back on your river or reinvestment in a new life, is thinking about how you can kind of plough things into a positive way. So for some people that I've worked with when they've been bereaved, it's a survivor mission, we call it, and it can be a really positive way of kind of ploughing that anger and that frustration, because some people's anger is absolutely justified. If things have been done kind of incorrectly, or government policies and procedures that have kind of gone in place, and there's a sense of kind of injustice there, and that's what kind of fuels the anger. That's idea of a survivor mission as part of a reinvestment in your new life and kind of creating a new reality can be a really productive way of working through your anger. So you're channeling that anger energy into changing things. So I know for you, Sam, you've been really open about some of the difficulties that you've had, and you didn't just kind of accept that, well, that just kind of happens. You've ploughed all that energy into changing things for other people. And I know a lot of people that have, they might have lost people through kind of cancer, and then they go on to raise money for charities and things like that. They do that kind of charity work, or they might go back and do some kind of volunteering, or, you know, people who've been through things that are really traumatic, a kind of a traumatic loss, or they go on to work with people that have gone through similar circumstances. And that anger then doesn't consume you. It becomes a productive outlet. It becomes a motivator.
Brilliant.
To kind of a new life and a new reality for yourself.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about supporting people as well, you know, we recognise that there are stages of anger, and, you know, there's a lot of anger around at the moment because of the situation we've all lived through for the last 12 months. But sometimes it's up to us as professionals to acknowledge that as well, and actually let it have some airtime, and to listen and sort of say, yeah, you know, we take that on board, and then to actually show that there is going to be change because of what someone's experienced. That's really important.
Dave, do you want to come in with any questions before we sort of move on to the Recovery College and what we offer there?
I'm muted in 2 places, so I wasn't expecting you to come to me just at that point. And I'm like, and last week, I remembered to unmute myself over here, but not on the stream. And we had a really good conversation, you know. Yeah. It was probably the most wise thing I've ever said, maybe. No, not at the minute.
Is there any comments in the chat or anything that we want to pick up now before we move on?
Basically, someone just said thank you for the whirlpool model. I've put a link to it in the chat, which I think people can access as well. Thank you for the whirlpool model. It's the best thing I've found for explaining how I'm feeling. Really useful. And we've just got a question just come in and say, sorry if you've already gone over this. I struggle to know what to say when reaching out to a loved one who's recently lost their partner. I worry I might remind them of their loss. Any advice?
They'll already be thinking about their loss, and actually maybe what they want to do is to remember. And I think going back to what you were saying, Dave, is reach out and give people the choice.
Yeah.
Or kind of say, I want to be here for you. A big part of what I do is sometimes going, I'm not sure how to respond there. I want to do this and I want to do that. And you can say that to your friends. Just say, listen, I'm here for you. If you want to talk about it, the person that you've lost, let's do that. But equally, if you don't, give people that choice, and acknowledge your own humanness, that I don't have all the answers. I might say the wrong thing. I might bumble over it, but know that my intentions are to care for you. So I think if they're struggling, just reach out and just kind of say, I might get it wrong, but my intention isn't to upset you. What do you need? And then we can be there for each other and give that person the choice.
Yeah.
The fact that person has kind of commented in the chat that they're not sure how to do it just shows that their intentions are to care for their friend, and just be honest about that.
Yeah. I think that's important. You know, like the friend, I'd rather the friend assumed that I wanted to know than assume that I didn't want to talk about it. And again, just telling that person that I'm here to talk about it. I know you might not want reminding of it all the time. So if, you know, just to let you know, I am here to talk about it. But at the same time, if you don't want to, that's equally fine. Something else has just come into the chat, actually, which I think is really important. And I said, and it's something I can very much relate to because I lost my grandma with dementia 5 years ago. And it says, my grandma suffered with dementia and passed away on Mother's Day. It was very difficult, but there's also feelings of guilt that I am a little relieved. And I think that's a normal human emotion, especially if someone's going through something like dementia. It's like to feel relief for that person. I twisted this. I'll talk through what I went through with this, because I twisted it around the other way and thought to myself and literally flipped the script. And I was like, who did like when we were kind of doing everything we could to keep my nan alive, who was that really for? Was that for her with the quality of life that she was having, or was that for us because we think that keeping someone alive as long as humanly possible is the, you know, quote unquote right thing to do? And I kind of put myself in the position and thought, you know what, I wouldn't want my family to I wouldn't want them to have the collateral loss as well. It's like, you know, if I was in my nan's shoes, I've lost my life. I don't want those my family to, and I don't think any of us would want this if we thought about it. It's a slightly morbid thing to think about. We're talking about bereavement, so you can't really escape morbid. But I'd put myself in that shoes, and I think to myself, right, I mean, obviously I want a massive shrine and all the rest of it, but ultimately it's like, I don't really want my family members to lose a portion of their life because I've lost mine. I'd want them, you know, to be able to move on with their lives and to be able to kind of enjoy the life that they've got. And I think it's perfectly normal to kind of feel guilty about that, because yeah, there is a relief. There's certainly around sort of chronic or degrading illness like dementia. There is a relief that, okay, you know, we say things like, this person, they're in a better place now, or they're not suffering anymore. And it is such a strange double-edged sword to have that relief and almost kind of guilt with it at the same time. But I don't think, you know, the guilt, it's not serving you anything. It's not doing anything for you, and it's also it's understandable that it's there, but at the same time, it's that kind of guilt is for us to forgive ourselves of that, really.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, the guilt can come from that sense of relief, or it can come from, could I have done more? Guilt is an absolutely normal part of grieving, and I think when we do normalise it and kind of say it's understandable that you'd feel part of that, it allows people then to kind of take the steps to be able to let it go. So yeah, and I think the guilt it's thinking about where the guilt comes from. Like you said, Dave, it's often a sense of relief that person's no longer in pain.
Yeah.
So the source of the guilt is actually that you really, really care for the person that you've lost. And it's reflective of the love that you had for them.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more question? So I've worked with a lot of young people that have a real fear around losing people in their families, especially over the last 12 months. Some young people have been petrified about COVID and losing their parents, for example. What advice can you give to those individuals that do really fear about losing loved ones?
Well, it's not my area of expertise.
Sorry, it's a difficult question.
No, absolutely. I think a fear of death has kind of hit us all, and it's that sense that it's our own mortality, isn't it? And more so with younger people, there's that sense of invincibility, isn't there? There can be. So when you're surrounded by death, it brings your own mortality into question. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of on a broken record, but I'd say just encourage them to talk about those feelings. And I know it sounds morbid, and as Dave's pointed out, we are talking about grief and loss, so there's going to be a morbid element, but doing some of the practical stuff. So actually, if a young person is worried about a parent passing away, have a dialogue about that and think about the practicalities. So if I did pass away, who would look after me? And often having that conversation about those practicalities can reassure people that there is a plan in place, that they're not going to be kind of left to fend for themselves on their own. And I've had kind of quite a lot of conversations with people about just the practical stuff. You know, if that person dies, what do they want? You know, sometimes young people don't know what their parents want. If they wanted for their funeral, what would they want? And I would suggest to people, have those conversations about the practicalities of stuff. What actually is it that you're worrying about the death? Is it that you don't know how you're going to cope on your own? Is it that I'm going to miss you so much? And it just opens up those kind of conversations, really. And you can, I have an idea of what I want when I go. I have an idea of what my parents want when they go, what they would want for their. I'm like, Dave, I'm going to have a massive party.
Right.
I want people to celebrate my life. I don't want people to, I'm a person that lives life, and I want people to kind of celebrate my my passing in that way. And it's having those conversations sometimes can just reassure people. So
those conversations are really important. I know that when I lost my dad, I remember my mum saying to me, I just wish we'd had the conversation, because when it came to things like arranging funerals or, how do we let people know, who do we let know? When you're in those first initial stages of grief and the shock that comes with it, you suddenly have to pull yourself together to get this event organised. And it's really difficult if you haven't had that conversation. But then that carries on for some time afterwards, because you have things like, the finances and things like that to sort out. And if you've not had that preparing conversation, if you've not had that open sort of, this is my wish, even down to this is the music I'd like playing, or these are the passages I'd like reading, it's really important to be able to say that and take control of it yourself. And I know that Mum has then, gone off and sort of put all of the things in place for her own funeral, because she knows now that actually this can happen at any time, and having that open conversation is really important. And I think, especially with younger people, it's not something we don't even think about it. I'm about to turn 40 and I'm thinking, right, I need to have this conversation because everything goes downhill from here, I'm told. But I do need to have that open conversation with my children and sort of say, me and your dad now, you see us as really old. So actually, what comes with aging? And we need to have that conversation. So my kids know exactly, what I want as well. So let's remove some of the stigma around dying, and actually realise that it's an event in life that's going to happen to everyone, and therefore let's plan around it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's that it's almost like that death's the taboo, isn't it? And anything that's kind of a taboo is created around it, then creates really, really kind of difficult feelings that are hard to kind of work through. Whereas if we just kind of acknowledge it, unfortunately, death is a part of being human. It's going to do us all. It's something that we all will share at some point, and just having that, just kind of breaking down some of those barriers of, and we've all done it. We've all done a disclosure today, gone, oh, well, I know it's a bit morbid, and that's that taboo, isn't it? We've all kind of done it today on this call, but kind of breaking down those things, I think, and just kind of prepare. I mean, I've got young children, and they have that kind of, we'll always be together, and it's just little things like saying, well, we might not always be together at some point, things will be different. And that's how you introduce that idea, but it being part of a normal, that it's part of being human, it's part of kind of normal life, and that they can talk about it if they want to.
I can imagine everyone sat around the dinner table tonight. Right, okay. Topic of conversation.
Yeah. Just to touch on what you said, Suzie, before as well, I've heard 40 is the new 20. So yeah, it's not downhill from there.
It is, yeah.
Get Ibiza booked. So to come to you now, Suzie, could you tell us about the Recovery College? Just a brief overview of what it is, and then what actually is available through the Recovery College. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Recovery College has been around for a couple of years now. So it started in January 2019. And basically what we try to provide is an opportunity for people with lived experience to come to a safe space to talk about their experiences with mental health and well-being, and create courses, workshops that help pass on that lived experience to others. And I think, we've mentioned it a few times today, the importance of just being able to talk openly, whether that's, positive or negative, all experience matters. So I work alongside a team of wonderful peer volunteers, so that people with lived experience of a variety of mental health and physical health issues. But we talk about it to say, this is how it's impacted on my life. These are the changes that I've needed to make. We look at some of the models that we use in mental health to promote well-being, and we share those messages. It's a place of community. So we're trying to say to communities that it's okay to talk, and it's okay to ask the questions as well. You know, we've spoken about some of the stigma today that surrounds mental health, and especially around subjects like grief and bereavement. That actually, if we can bring like-minded individuals together and just talk openly and safely about it, it has a huge impact on our own self-management, our own recovery journey, and hopefully leads to some really positive change. So we are looking at how we can design and develop courses, but we also work with loads of partners across Lancashire and South Cumbria, because we are in a region, we're really lucky, we have lots available to us in our communities. So lots of opportunities to go and share our experiences, or learn a little bit more about why someone might be behaving the way they are, why someone might be having a really tough time, and how we approach that, how we support one another. And so we knew at the beginning of COVID that death and loss was going to be a huge part of the next year. It's over a year now. So we approached obviously Victoria and Hayley and sort of said, you know, we need to broach this subject of loss and bereavement. And we started to look at some of the models that they'll use within services and share those with people. So like Dave said, someone's commented to say the whirlpool of grief, you wouldn't come across it, you know, in a standard bereavement web search. But if we can share that model and people can relate to it, it helps them identify where they are on a journey, what might, you know, scupper part of that recovery journey. And we created some videos together that are available on our website. But we also try and link people to what else is available out there in the public. And something that I want to make I want to focus people on at the moment is the fact that we've got Dying Matters Week coming up. So that runs from the 10th to the 16th of May, and it's a national scheme. It's a week where we look at all of the complications of death and bereavement and how we can prepare better for it. And so if people go on to dyingmatters.org, they can have a look to see what support or what podcasts and learning there is available in their region, in their area. And obviously a lot of it's going to take place online this year because of the restrictions that are still in place. But the theme for this year is being in a good place to die. And that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, a physical location, but it's looking at how can we get ourselves into that good place so that we can talk about death. So they're going to focus on the importance of thinking about death, talking about it, and then planning for it. So everything that we've talked about really this morning. And through Recovery College, we'll be making sure that we're signposting people to some of those national and regional events. So if you want to learn more, or if you want to get involved and actually deliver something as part of Dying Matters Week, I'd encourage people to get in contact with us and let us know, because we can help make sure that gets out to the masses online. In regards to this subject matter, we've done quite a lot of work over the years in regards to death and loss. One particular project that is coming in June is called Phoenix Rising. So this is the second part of an arts and culture programme. We had the Phoenix Project last year. It was really successful. So it's looking at those outlets that Victoria mentioned before. So when you are feeling that anger or that frustration, or you just don't know where to go, you often need to find something where we can place this. What can I do to not necessarily take your mind off it, but to just direct that energy somewhere? And we found that arts and creativity can be really useful for a lot of people. And Phoenix Rising will have a number of outlets there. So they'll be looking at visual arts, they'll be looking at physical health through things like movement and yoga. And we'll also be looking at how we can use our natural environment to get back out and about and learn more about ecotherapy. We've also previously worked with a lady called Yvonne Reddick, who works at the University of Lancashire, Central Lancashire. and delivered a number of courses and workshops pre-COVID around creative writing and poetry that supports people through that grieving process. And Yvonne actually released a book that can be used as a companion, really, in the months and years after bereavement. And again, a link to that can be found on the Recovery College website. But we will be looking to actually deliver some of those courses again, so we can bring people together to look at that creative process when restrictions or online learning allows. But in the meantime, I would sort of direct staff, especially who are looking at how they can support their colleagues and service users, to that publication, because it comes with exercises within it that you can do in your own time and promote out to others. So there is lots of help and support available. It can feel really difficult finding the right support very early on in that grief process. So I would echo the point that Victoria made, just sit with it. It's fine, it's natural, everyone goes through it. And there's no time scale on when you're going to move from one bit to the next of any model. But when you're ready to then look for some support and some further guidance on how to deal with the emotions of grief, then by all means get in contact with us at the Recovery College, and we'll try and signpost you to something that really suits you at that time.
And everything's free, isn't it, Suzie, for people as well?
Absolutely, yeah. At the end of the day, we believe that everyone has the right to have really flourishing well-being. People have that right to access anything in their community for free as well. So the Recovery College acts as an aid to introduce people to those learning and social opportunities. So we'll look at that introduction and we'll signpost you to what support's available. But those initial stages, it will always be free through Recovery College and all of our wonderful community partners.
And there is a lot out there as well, as you can see. If you follow the Recovery College on Twitter as well, they do post the calendars on there, which is absolutely fantastic. And there is all sorts available to you every day of the week as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So where else will be best for people to contact? And I will put this in my mailing list. I'll send that out to my mailing list after this webinar. So the website, Twitter.
Yeah, we've got a website, and yeah, we're on Twitter. We also have a group on Facebook. So we're just trying to use as many different outlets as we can to let people know what we're doing. And our staff within the trust and across other trusts in Lancashire and South Cumbria, we're trying to make sure people know about what we're doing, so that if you're trying to support someone, because we know what workloads are like, but to be able to signpost somebody off to the Recovery College will hopefully be really beneficial for you and your teams. And it's important to say we are open to everyone. We're not, we were created obviously to support the health and wellbeing and the recovery journeys of our service users, but we are open to everyone in the whole community, our staff. And during COVID, because we've taken the college online, we've had people from Canada tuning into some of our courses. So it's great for us because we get that really wide-ranging sort of lived experience that people bring. But we'll be back to face-to-face deliveries hopefully in the summer. We appear all over Lancashire and South Cumbria at beautiful venues like Harris Museum. So yeah, you can come along.
And are you aware, Suzie, because we do get people listening throughout the UK, I know of other recovery colleges around the northwest area, but is there ones all around the UK?
They are everywhere. Yeah, I'm part of a national group where Recovery College managers come together, and we share resources as well. We share best practice to make sure that throughout the country, people have access to a wide variety of health and wellbeing sort of courses and workshops. And we're working on that. But what I would say is contact your local mental health trust, but also your local Mind, the charity Mind. They tend to work in partnership with recovery colleges nationally. So it's not, recovery colleges aren't just in mental health trusts. Look to your community. look to your health and well-being coaches. You tend to find that they're employed through your local council. Also within GP practices now, most GP practices will have a social prescriber. So if you feel that, you know, you've received that clinical care that you might need, but actually you need a little help moving forward by meeting other people, you know, doing an activity you enjoy like gardening or walking, it can be really hard to make those connections on your own. But if you go and see a social prescriber or a health and wellbeing practitioner, they'll be able to put you in contact with free local resources. We concentrate very much on producing courses and, you know, looking at things from that lived experience perspective. But we know that once you start, it's a can of worms. Once you open it up, there's so many different things that people can do to stay well and to live well.
Thanks, Suzie. Dave, is there any questions or comments before we sort of round this up?
Yeah, just a comment from Ariana that said, but in reference to when we were talking about asking the person, she said, you can ask the person if they want to talk about it. The worst already happened. You cannot make it worse. I lost my daughter to suicide last year. I think that's worth kind of highlighting, saying like that's from someone in the position of grief, saying that like that it's not going to make it worse by actually asking the person if they want to talk about it.
They've already been through it.
Yeah,
that's the first bit.
Yeah, exactly. Steve Ratcliffe said that you can relate to what I said in the idea of changing the perspective. When I lost my grandparents, I focused on the fact that they had some physical health problems and took tablets to extend their life. I focused on feeling grateful for modern medicine at the time that I had with them, and that I had longer than I would have had without medicine. And so, someone said, any advice on how to engage in an open conversation about death? It worries me how closed off my mum is to speaking about the topic. I worry for the day someone close passes and how she might cope. So like how to engage those dialogues with someone who's resistant to engage in those dialogues, I suppose, would be the question.
I suppose you could look at options really, that it doesn't have to be dialogue. You don't have to have that conversation, and maybe look for other ways of approaching a subject. So like I mentioned before, people find creativity can be really helpful to get some difficult emotions and feelings down on paper. So, you know, it could be through poetry, it could be through painting, it could be through watching a television program that's about that subject and then discussing it afterwards. So it's finding the right opportunity, but also being aware of what support is out there when, you know, a death happens, so that at some point someone will say, I'm going to need some support now. And if you've already got that waiting, you know, that can be as much as you can do for some people. Some people don't want to talk about death. I found it very, very difficult to talk about when I experienced grief. And it wasn't till a long, long time after that I've been able to talk about it. But that's just the way I handled it. So, you know, it's good to talk, but equally it's good to respect sometimes that people might not want to.
Victoria, is anything that you'd add?
Yeah, I just echo what Suzie was saying, that sometimes people don't want to use words, but expressing their feelings in another way. Sometimes I find sharing my own feelings then creates a forum where it feels easier for other people to share. You know, that person's mother might not be aware that they're thinking about this, and them kind of taking that step and that little leap of faith to share how they're feeling might then allow mum to open up. And sometimes it's about saying, you don't need to protect me. I know as an adult child to an adult parent, it's sometimes it's saying, you don't need to protect me from this anymore, because sometimes us mums continue to want to protect our children even when they're adults.
Dave, is there anything else?
I just think it's normal human nature to kind of push off difficult conversations, even though we kind of know that those not having those difficult conversations might lead us to problems down the line. That's okay. That's future my problem, you know. It's like, and it's the thing is that we do that because we want to avoid discomfort in the moment that we're in. Sometimes that's like, you know, that's often why people offer the fix, like try and offer the fix, or like tell someone to cheer up or whatever it might be. Like they'll offer a quick platitude because we don't like dealing with uncomfortable emotions. And I think it's important for us to know that going in. If we go in saying, oh, this is going to be a super easy conversation, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure. But if we go in and with the attitude of, okay, this is difficult, but it's important, and I'm accepting the fact that I'm going to choose to be uncomfortable now so that we can maybe like have answers for this long term. I think for anyone that's thinking about going into those type of conversations, it's worth knowing what you kind of, choicefully deciding, okay, I know it's going to be uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it anyway.
But that uncomfortableness won't last forever.
No, and it'll be gone, and then you'll spend more time glad of the fact that you had it. And we see this in not all, but in many fields of mental health, that the thing that we think is uncomfortable, if we don't have it in the back of our mind, we've still got a bit of discomfort. We're still kind of got a little tab open back there somewhere saying, oh, I wish I could have had that conversation. I wish I could have that conversation. I wish I could. And then you don't have the conversation. Now you can't have the conversation. Whereas the other way around, it's like if you have it, then you've got all that time of just of kind of you've almost, it's sorted now. It's done, and actually I feel relieved. You'll have that discomfort for a short space of time, and then the relief comes along after. We call it a slingshot and a boomerang. A boomerang is you give yourself the comfort in the short time, only for the boomerang to come whipping back later and give you discomfort. And the slingshot is you put it under tension for the short period of time now, and you get the result later on. So it's another example of one of those. I can make everything an example of one of those, though. That's kind of my thing.
Is there any other comments, Dave, or questions? Or if not, I'll round it up.
We had a request for Susie's email address. Is that something you're happy to give out?
Yeah, we've got a recovery.college@lscft.nhs.uk.
Right, I
will include that in the email out as well if you're on my mailing list.
Cool, and if you can send that to me, I'll put it in the notes rather than put it in chat now, because by the time I've typed it in, we'll have probably ended the stream.
So I'll round it up then. Thank you very much for both of you for joining us today. Really, really appreciate your insights. I found that extremely informative. Thank you to the viewers for watching. Please do share this once it's uploaded to YouTube following this live stream. That is it for the Mental Health Staff Hour. So thank you for supporting this 4-part series. The Family Hour will be continuing. However, I think we will only be continuing until roughly mid-June, towards the end of June. So please do keep it out. Yeah, we said that last year. Yeah, still going. So thank you very much for all your support. Once again, if you do have any questions, please do email me on sam.tyrer, so TYRER @lscft.nhs.uk. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you to our guests once again, and we'll look forward to speaking to you all again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.